Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're watching from. And thank you for joining us here on blackdoctor.org. I am Ellis Dean, and I am the Director of Digital Programming for blackdoctor.org. And I am excited about this program because, as you know, here we do a lot of programs on physical health, right? And we talk about physical health, and we talk about diabetes and high blood pressure and cholesterol and COVID and all of these different things. But we don't ever and we talk about mental health, but we talk about it in terms of psychological health. But now we're going to talk about the brain and the mental health that is part of your brain health. So we're going to be talking about what it means to age and what aging does to the brain and how can we slow that process down? That if the brain starts to decay, we'll slow that down. We've got a great presentation with Dr. Stan here from our friends at Cedars-Sinai. So I'm so excited to get to this presentation because I know, as my mother would say, I've had some senior moments, and we want to make sure that those senior moments are not something that is going to be permanent. They're just momentary lapse of memory or judgment. But we're going to find all of that out and more from Dr. Tan. So I want to say, welcome to the program, Dr. Tan.
Thank you, Alice. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
And it's fantastic. So if you have any questions, or a couple of quick instructions. Number one, drop in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. We like to know where people are watching us from all over the country. So just drop in your city, state. You can put your high school in there if you want to. Whatever you want. Not whatever you want. Let me back that up. You can put where you're from in there. Number two, if you know somebody that needs this information, tag them or share it on your page so people can get this valuable information about their brain health. And finally, if you have any questions, please drop those also in the comment section, and we will ask them at the end of the presentation, at the end of the program, because we're here to answer your questions about your brain. So no further ado, I know you didn't sign on to hear me go, so I'm going to shut up and I'm going to sit back. I'm going to bring up Dr. Tan's presentation, and we're going to get this thing started.
All right. Thank you so much, Ellis. Again, it's a pleasure to be with you in this presentation. My name is Aldi Tan. I'm the director of the Lynn Family Memory and Healthy Aging Program and the medical director of the Yonah Goldrich Center for Alzheimer's Disease and Memory Disorder here in Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. And today I'll be talking to you about brain health and healthy aging. Specifically, what can we do to keep our brains healthy as we all get older? And today's focus will be actually on the African American population. So we'll advance to the next slide. So this is the population curve of the United States. And as you can see, comparing to 1960 to 2060, you can see that there is what we call the squaring off of the population curve, which means that we will have as many people who are over the age of 65 as we'll have people in their teenage years or 20s or 30s. So in a sense, the fastest growing population, in fact, are the people who are age 85 plus, which happens to be also the age of risk for memory changes as well as other cognitive changes as they get older. So there's going to be more and more of us who are in this age group, and therefore it's important to keep in our minds healthy as we get older. Next slide. I wish I could say that the memory problems like Alzheimer's disease affects everyone equally, but in fact, according to studies, African Americans are more vulnerable to getting memory problems as they get older compared to Caucasian Americans and other race categories or racial groups in the United States. So this is especially important to keep in mind as we get older. Next. In fact, if we looked at the incidence of dementia among older individuals, we find that African Americans are far and away the groups that are more commonly afflicted by this devastating memory issue. And of course, more studies are needed because African Americans are underrepresented in research, and therefore it's important to have African Americans participate in research studies so we know what the actual incidence of dementia is in this population. Next. The African Americans, as I mentioned, are about twice as likely than white Americans to get Alzheimer's disease. And the other thing to keep in mind is that African Americans also experience a delay in diagnosis and treatment of memory problems. And therefore, programs like these increase the awareness of the importance of keeping track of our memory and keeping our memories and our brains healthy is super important. Next. Now, with that introduction, I would like to then shift on something more positive, right? The aging of the human brain. Everyone is aging, no matter what age we are, and I want to go over what to expect as the brains and our minds and our bodies get older. Next. So this is a cartoon depiction of the human brain. As you can see, the human brain is divided into different lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. And these lobes actually are more than just anatomic regions, because each lobe of the brain serves our different their different functions, including memory. So if you go to the next slide, you will see that the functional anatomy of the brain is even more complex, right? Things like creativity, language, memory, imagination. These are all based in different parts of the brain. So we definitely want to keep the entire brain healthy, but there are also different patterns of aging as we get older that we must keep in mind. So not all parts of our brains age in the same way. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that parts of the brain, in fact, decrease in size or shrink as one gets older. And in certain disease conditions like Alzheimer's disease or stroke or other forms of neurodegenerative condition, some parts of the brain degenerate or decrease in size more than others. In this picture, you don't have to be a radiologist or a neuroimager to see which one's the 27-year-old brain and which one's the 87-year-old brain. As you can see, the 27-year-old brain on the left side of the screen, it's much fuller and it seems to be much healthier. In the 87-year-old brain, you can see that there's a little bit of shrinkage in the size, and that's kind of what can be expected as we get older, and certainly more pronounced if we get certain diseases like stroke and Alzheimer's disease. Next.
So this is just part of the natural progression of aging that happens. Well, we'll talk about it if we can slow that down later on, but go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. So some of the true aging brain changes is, as Ellis asked, there is a decrease in the brain volume with age. That's just a given. Just like there's a decrease in muscle mass as we get older, right? Decrease in skin elasticity, and that's why we get wrinkles. There's a decrease in hair, for example, as we get older. Those are all parts of aging, but that doesn't mean that everyone experiences the same rate or extent of brain aging. Within the brain cells, there's also a decrease in the number of cells that are in the brain cells, in the brain itself. And there could be some changes in the way that the brains communicate with each other through neurotransmitters. Other things that we have to keep in mind is that the speed of reaction time actually decreases. So that means that it may take us a bit longer to remember that name of the restaurant that we went to this weekend, or the name of our favorite actor from the movie that we saw a few days ago. So that is part of normal age-related changes. Next.
So a quick question here, and this is kind of like one of those trying to verify one of those urban myths. So is it true that brain cells do not regenerate?
Yeah, so that has been the belief for the longest time among researchers, Alice. But in fact, that's been disproven. And
Okay.
in fact, in the past several years or so, it's been shown that humans do grow new brain cells as we get older. So it's not true that the brain cells, like other parts of our body, do not grow any new cells. There is, in fact, what we call neurogenesis, or the ability of the brain to form new brain cells, even in the later years.
But that's good to know. Okay.
Absolutely, a positive message there. All right, let's shift from the structural brain aging, or the physical, the look of the brain to actually the mind, right? The mind is actually how the brain functions. In fact, it's what we care most about, not so much the structure. Next. I think of the mind as a concert, in a sense that this is actually the LA Philharmonic, and that is the conductor Gustavo Demel in front. And each of these sections of the orchestra, the string, the percussion, the wind, the organ, the instruments, the wind instruments, they're all serve different functions, right? So if you think of the orchestra as the brain, one section will be taking care of abstract thinking. One section will be taking care of memory. Another section will be taking care of language, attention, calculation, executive function. Each of these will need to function in sequence and in harmony in order for our brains to work properly. So whether we are listening to a concert, or we're driving to our favorite restaurant, or attending a party, or composing an email, all of these parts of the brain need to be functioning properly in order for us to complete that task. Some tasks are more taxing than others, meaning some tasks require all of our attention, our memory, our language abilities, whereas some tasks are more chill, right? They may be maybe more language or more memory. But regardless of the task, if we have a failure of one of these cognitive functions, what we will see is that we will have a suboptimal performance in terms of our cognitively based tasks. Next. So if we break down the mind, there's really these six main functions. Memory is on top, but certainly not the only function of our mind, meaning even if our memory is intact, but our attention is poor, or our language function is poor, abstract thinking, calculation, executive function, we will still detect a problem in our day-to-day function. In fact, some of our patients who's had a stroke, their memory is perfectly fine, but the stroke affected their language function. So they can't express themselves, or they can't understand other people talking to them. And I can tell you, it's equally as devastating as someone who has a memory problem like Alzheimer's disease. So the brain is a really complex organ.
Is that because the stroke happens in a certain part of the brain, like you were showing earlier, and that stroke
Correct.
happens in that part of the brain, and that's when it impacts that particular function? Okay.
Correct. Absolutely. Next. So what happens with in terms of memory and normal aging is that there's typically a decrease in processing speed, as I mentioned earlier. It takes us a bit longer to come up with the name of that person that we bump into in the supermarket, or remembering the list of things that we need to pick up from the supermarket itself. There's also a decrease in short-term recall, spatial memory. But the speed of information processing is the one's most affected. So don't be distressed if it takes you a while to remember what you were supposed to do when you get into a room and you don't know why you're there in the first place. Sometimes it's really just the speed of information processing. So don't panic. Next. So with that, I want to say that not everything is poor or in the decline with regards to memory. There's actually some things that do improve as we get older. For example, emotionality, semantic knowledge, and vocabulary. And we'll go over each one of these very briefly. Next one. Emotionality is the way we respond to a specific memory. So in fact, what the researchers have found is that as we get older, our emotionality improves, which means that we prefer emotionally positive and meaningful information and memories over those that are negative. So as you know, we have a lot of young people who have mental health issues, are very much in distress, and that's, certainly there are older people who are like that as well. And our brains work in such a way that that we prefer, or we tend to remember more the positive things that have happened to us, even though we are all a combination of positive and negative things. Our older minds tend to favor the positive things, which is a good thing. We also have something called positive emotional bias, meaning when we see when we have something happen to us, or an emotional event, we tend to see more the positive, meaning we see the glass as half full rather than half empty as we get older.
We can call that the gambler's brain, Doc. We can say that they remember the wins and not the losses. So we can just that's why you keep playing the games. Okay.
That's absolutely a good way to describe it, Alice. The other thing that improves as we get older is what we call the semantic knowledge and vocabulary, which is really our knowledge of the world, right? And it makes sense because as we get older, we just have that much more accumulated life experiences. You know, we've traveled more, we've met more people, we've been through more heartbreaks and joys. So we have more knowledge of the world from experience. Vocabulary also improves with age. So that's why younger people see older people as wiser, just because of that lived experience makes us more able to see the world in a better perspective and give good advice to younger people.
Yeah, it was interesting. I went and saw my uncle about a week or so ago, and he's 84. And he was sitting there and just giving an account of the family history, and he knew dates and years and names, and he just rattled everything off. Like, it was just I was sitting there, I was more learning about the family history, but I was just amazed at how much he was able to recall so vividly and so quickly, and just tell the story as if it was yesterday. And he was talking about stuff that happened in the 50s, 60s, and parents graduated from college in 1931, and he knew the years and dates and people. It was really fascinating.
That's really impressive. That's also called the crystallized memory, Ellis. So these are things that have been have gone from his short-term memory to his long-term memory. So those are hardwired in his brain. So he can come up with them like this. Very impressive. So I'm going to shift a bit in from normal aging to some of the things that we can do to maintain brain health that are actually within our control. Meaning there are things that we can't control, like our race or our parents or how old we are, right? But there are things that are within our control. So I want to talk more about that.
Oh, no, this is the section I've been waiting on. Okay, here we go, guys.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. Go ahead, John.
Now, I'm just saying, if y'all are just joining us, we are talking to Dr. Zaldi Tan from Cedar Sinai, and we are talking about healthy aging. And we're not just talking about your body, we're talking about your mind. And so this is a section we just talked about the structure of the brain and how the brain works in, and really about the mind, because the brain is the physical part, but the mind is what we're really kind of focusing on: memory, cognitive processing speed, all of these things that tend to decline as we age. But here now we're going to talk about some things that we can do, or things that can accelerate that decline, or things that we can do to slow down that decline as we age. And so I'm seeing some risk factors here. One or two I might have dabbled in my life. And so let's pay close attention to what's going on. And again, if you have any questions, please drop those in the comment section.
Yes, absolutely, Alice. We are all a combination of risk and protective factors. And the trick here is that we really want to have more things in the risk on the protective factors category and less things in the risk factor category. But just looking at this, you can see that some of the risk factors for accelerated or worse outcomes in terms of brain aging are things like having an unhealthy diet, right? Diets that are very high salt, high fat, things that are less less good for you. Alcohol misuse. I'll show you a slide later on looking at what happens to the brain with too much alcohol. Smoking, diabetes. These are all risk factors for heart disease, as you know, that are not good for you. But now we have evidence that these things are also not good for your brain. So what's good for your brain is what's good for your heart, and what's not good for your heart is also not good for your brain. Things like carrying those extra pounds, especially in midlife or beyond, high blood pressure, especially those that are poorly controlled, and high cholesterol are all bad for you. And again, there are things that are beyond our control, like our genes. There are just certain genetic risk factor, like the ApoE4 gene, that can confer a greater risk of getting Alzheimer's disease later in life. But then there are a lot of things that are under our control. So some things that are more protective, so on the positive side of the scale, are things like education. The more education you have, the less likely you are to develop dementia or Alzheimer's disease later in your life.
Okay.
Exercise, physical exercise is truly one of the greatest things we can do for our brain. It increases blood flow to the brains. It increases brain factors that promote brain cell growth and development and health. So physical exercise is key. Cognitive and social activity. We are social beings. Once we retire, sometimes we have less of that natural built-in social interaction. That's why it's important to make extra effort to make sure that we have that. So I'll go over this a bit more, the risk and protective factors.
So I always was told, like, when you exercise, there you get feel good endorphins released in the brain, and then that it has a protective and healing factor. So talk a little bit about, you're probably going to talk about it later on, so maybe I'm getting ahead of the presentation, but I think that was always one of those things that, like, running. I remember I saw a counselor one time and he said you should try running because you'll get those natural feel good endorphins that'll lift your mood and your spirit. So if you're having some anxiety or depression type symptoms, running or physical activity could help with that process in a natural way.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right that that exercise makes us feel good, lifts us out of our depression, and makes us more active and makes us more likely to make healthy lifestyle choices. Helps with our sleep. But beyond that, Alice, exercise increases blood flow to the brain and other organs. It also increases the health or promotes the health of the blood vessels that
Mm,
that feed oxygen into the brain, and the brain is oxygen is super important, and it also stimulates the secretion of this BDNF, which is this natural factor that actually promotes brain cell growth and development. So
mm,
there's a lot of positive things with physical exercise and maintaining brain health.
absolutely, that's great.
Next slide. So, and this is an interesting slide because the thought is that having a family history or a genetic predisposition for, let's say, dementia or Alzheimer's disease is not enough. Meaning, if my mother or father both had Alzheimer's disease, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get Alzheimer's disease. Why? Because there has to be other factors or other hits that my brain has to take in order for me to get that disease, right? So, for example, if I have chronic pain that's not controlled, or microvascular disease, or being exposed to certain medications, or if, God forbid, I had cancer and had chemotherapy, those can all have bad effects on my overall brain health. So that's what we call the double whammy or triple whammy, right? If you have a family history, that's one hit, and then you get depression or anxiety or pain or microvascular disease, that's what's going to tip you over. So again, it's not just one factor, but several factors we need to take into account.
And then we have to include that other slide with other lifestyle factors. So that's just, kind of brain related factors. But then you're thinking about how much do you exercise, what's your education level, what's your BMI in comparison. And so all of those other things kind of set the whole picture of what that brain health will be as you age. Okay.
Absolutely. Those are everything counts. Everything counts. In fact, this is the message in this figure is that leisure activity, mental activity, exercise, diet, all of these are factoring into the overall health of our brain. And of course, we can't all be excellent in everything, but as many positive things we can exert in our brain, the better. That's the message here. Okay, next. And the important thing to think about is no matter what age group we're in, there are positive things we can do for our brain health. Certainly, with young people, we're talking about people who are in the in the elementary school or high school or college, education is really the best investment that one can make in terms of their future brain health. And it's been studied over and over again that people with higher brain education, especially higher education, especially when the time when their brains are developing, these are the young plastic brains. It's super important because that builds the connections between the brain cells that will ultimately protect us from age-related diseases later on. And as we get to middle age, we accumulate some of the wear and tear that happens in middle age, like decrease in hearing. And, if we ever fell off a bike or a horse or had a car accident, traumatic brain injury, high blood pressure, alcohol, being overweight. So these are things in middle age we need to be careful that we don't get that. And if we do, we try to control it as much as we can. And as we transition into the later age, we get the cumulative effects of things like smoking, depression, social isolation, lack of exercise, air pollution. All of these things are going to impact us, especially as we get from transition from middle to later age. So again, the message here is no matter what age group you're in, there are positive things you can do to improve your brain health.
So, Dr. Tan, we got a great question coming in from from one of our audience, and she's saying, so lifestyle and overall health is more important than genetics. I think they're trying to get some sort of order in terms of which is more important. Is it genetics or is it lifestyle and healthy factors that you basically have more control over?
That's a great question, Mary Jo. The question here is what age are we talking about, right? Unfortunately, in a specialized center like at Cedars-Sinai, we do get patients who are in their 30s, 40s, or 50s who get Alzheimer's disease. And these people who get dementia in an early age, genetics is a more important factor because it wasn't about a lifestyle. It's just that they were dealt a bad card in terms of their genetics, and they get dementia or Alzheimer's disease, at a young age. But for the vast majority of us, I would say the 90% or more of Alzheimer's disease are people who get it in their 70s, 80s, or 90s. There, as Mary Jo said, lifestyle is a lot more important than genetics. And our cumulative choices, health and lifestyle choices that we make will catch up on us when we get older. So definitely, it's time to invest in our brain health as early as possible.
Great.
Next slide. And to Mary Jo's point, related to her point, prevention by decreasing these risk factors and promoting the protective factors has potential of decreasing the overall risk of Alzheimer's disease by quite a lot. In fact, the pure Alzheimer's disease that I described, the ones who get it in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, they account for about 10 to 30% of all cases of Alzheimer's disease. That means about 80, 90% of cases of dementia are accounted for by lifestyle choices, not by genetics, right?
All right.
So important to think about.
Let that sink in, folks. We got control over what happens to us, so we gotta make better decisions. We gotta make better decisions.
That's right. That's right. And these things that are listed here: diabetes, hypertension, obesity, physical inactivity, depression, smoking, and education, are just some of the things that we can't control. And I'll go over this with you in a little bit more detail. Next.
So, Dr. Tan, I know you mentioned education, and some of those things are beyond our control, based on where we live, what school we go to, things of that nature. Are there ways that we can supplement that? Like, let's say for leisure reading, that instead of like watching television, you read a book, you try to read as much as possible. Will that help to kind of supplement that education experience, or is it something more like a formal education that you're talking about?
Well, both are good. Both are important. I don't know of any studies that looked at people who had, let's say, didn't get as much education as they should have, and then caught up by reading or attending lectures or learning a new language. There hasn't been a study looking at both. So if you happen to not have had the opportunity, as Elle said, because of your where the circumstances of your birth or where you were born, etc., that you didn't have as much formal education, it's definitely that much more important to catch up by reading, engaging in intellectually stimulating activities, and keeping your brain as sharp as possible. That's a good point.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to go over a bit in terms of more specifically about the different things we can do. And here at Cedars, we have a mnemonic called Brains, and these are the things that actually will help you maintain your brain health as you get older. B stands for blood pressure, R for rest and sleep, A is for activity, both physical and social activities, I is intellectual stimulation, N is nutrition, and S is the three things that are also important in terms of environmental exposure, smoking, alcohol, and pollution. I'm going to go over this quickly just to give you an idea of what we should be aiming for. Next. Blood pressure. And the question, is a lower blood pressure better for the brain? And the answer seems to be yes. So there are studies that have been done looking at loose control of blood pressure versus intensive treatment of blood pressure. And it seems that people who were given blood pressure medications to better control their blood pressure, closer to 120/80, did better in terms of reducing their risk of memory problems later in life. So again, not everyone can reach that 120/80 or less blood pressure because we're all built differently. But the closer you are to that is better than having it run to 150s, 160s. So that's really the message here, is to work with your primary doctor, your cardiologist, or whoever it is that work with your controlling your blood pressure to make sure that you get it as tightly controlled as you can. Next.
And
So
it doesn't controlling the blood pressure also impact, like if the higher the blood pressure, the more risk you are for having that stroke that we talked about earlier in the program. And so the higher blood pressure puts you in a high risk category for having a stroke, and the stroke can affect those parts of the brain that can process and speed functioning, memory, wherever that stroke is. So that's why we try to control that blood pressure in order to lower those risk factors.
That's correct, Ellis. But beyond stroke, an elevated blood pressure itself can cause memory problems and other problems. Okay. My colleague here at Cedars, Dr. Alexis Simpkins, is actually going to be talking specifically about vascular risk factor, including stroke, and in a later part of this series. So watch out for that. But I'm sure what she will tell you is that lower blood pressure tend to have better outcomes. Meaning, this is the blood pressure targets. Normal blood pressure target now is 120/80. I remember when I was in medical school, we were told that anything 140/90 is perfectly fine, and that's healthy. Now, with more studies, it's been shown that lower blood pressure seems to be better. So here, normal is less than 120/80. Elevated blood pressure is 120 to 129 in the systolic or the upper part, and then the lower part diastolic is less than 80. And in fact, blood pressure that used to be considered normal, meaning systolic of 130 to 139 and diastolic of 80 to 89, is now considered stage 1 hypertension. And obviously, the higher the blood pressure gets, the worse outcome can be expected. So again, we want to aim for a blood pressure that is closer to 120/80 as we can, realizing that not everyone, may not be realistic for everyone, but the closer we get to 120/80, the better it is in terms of our brain health. In fact, it's not just hypertension or high blood pressure that's bad for us. Things like uncontrolled diabetes or elevated blood sugar, high cholesterol, that also increases risk for developing memory problems or dementia later in life. So again, for our brain health, it's important to control these risk factors. Next. Okay, transitioning to rest and sleep, which is the R in the brains after blood pressure. So the interesting thing about sleep is that we think of it as rest, but in fact, what we know now is that there's a lot of things that happen when we sleep. And we know that sleep is the time that we consolidate the memory. So everything that we learned that day or happened that day, our brains start to categorize and kind of put everything in the right place when we sleep. It consolidates memories so that we can access those memories later on. For example, the things that you learned today from listening. When you go to sleep tonight, our brains will put it all in the right place so that when you wake up in the morning, you'll be like, "Yes, I remember that lecture from Dr. Tan that I heard," and hopefully you can remember. But beyond that, though, there's actually a lot of things that happen within the brain itself. In fact, what is thought is that as we sleep, our brains clear up some of those abnormal proteins that accumulate in people who get Alzheimer's disease or the amyloid. In fact, if we go to the next slide, um, um, you'll see that when we sleep, our brains actually clear up or clean up all of those toxic metabolites that accumulate in the course of a day. So that's why it's so important that we get a good and solid night's sleep, 7 to 8 hours if we can afford it. Just because there's a lot of things that the brain needs to do even as we sleep and rest. So, in fact, there's a lot of studies that show that people who have poor sleep tend to get more Alzheimer's disease than those who don't. So
So
again,
talk to me about napping. Does napping help, or does it need to be kind of continuous sleep where we go into that deep REM sleep each night?
definitely the latter. You need that full night's sleep because you need to get to that deep stage 3 sleep in order to really get a lot of the beneficial effects of sleep. So if you take a multiple cat naps because you're bored and that results in a 3 hour sleep at night and you're awake at 4 in the morning, not knowing what to do with yourself, that's not good, right? So
Okay.
you need to limit daytime naps to maybe an hour or so that you actually get a solid night's sleep. And again, avoid those sleep medications that some people get hooked on. So natural sleep is really the best thing.
So that's melatonin, that's Ambien, that's I don't want to call any names out, but yeah. So those sleep aids, you got to avoid those. A good sleep aid is exercise. Just saying, just throwing it out there. We talked about the benefits of exercise. That's a good sleep aid. Tire
That's
yourself
right.
out.
Okay, so now we get to activity, right? Physical activity. This is a study that we did, and me and my colleagues looked at the Framingham study, which is a large study based in Massachusetts, looking at people's physical activity. And in fact, we found that people who have higher physical activity had bigger brains. They had bigger total brain and hippocampal volume. Hippocampus is the part of the brain that serves or is in control of short-term memory, which tends to be the most challenging in our people with age-related memory problems. So again, this is evidence that we found that people who have lower physical activity tend to have dementia more than those who have higher physical activity, and those who have higher physical activity tend to have bigger, fuller brains than those with lower physical activity. Next. Okay, so now we get to diet
Oh, there was a
or
good
nutrition. Yeah.
there was a good question, but I'll do it one on the intellectual stimulation because I think there's a good question. There's a couple of questions here, but I'm gonna hold off on those. But there's some good questions about memory loss and medication, and then there's also about games, playing games like Sudoku and things like that. Can they help in slow that memory decline? So we'll answer those questions later on, but just want to let the people know that we do see your questions and we are going to get them asked and answered.
All right. Perfect. Glad it. Keep the question coming. In terms of nutrition, um, the thing that seems to be we're seeing the pattern of in terms of research is that what we call the Mediterranean diet seems to be the most beneficial in terms of maintaining brain health. Mediterranean diet, think about if you've ever been to the Mediterranean in Europe, like in Europe, in Greece or in Italy, you notice that people in the Mediterranean tend to consume a lot of uh, uh, vegetables, fish, nuts, and less of sort of the unhealthy things that we tend to have in American diets, right? Like butter, fried foods. Indulging in some of these things occasionally is not bad for you. It's just a day-to-day thing. We want to limit that, and we want to have more of the things that are healthy for us, for our hearts and our brains. And if you go to the next slide, Ellis, you'll see sort of the recommended diet, right? So as shown in the picture, and here we want to have more whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and less of the meats and fats, red meats and fats that we consume. So again, we don't have to adhere to this religiously, but we definitely want to get more of the healthier types of food, as opposed to those who are those that we know are not good for us. Next. In terms of intellectual stimulation, there are a lot of studies that show that people who keep their minds active for as long as possible actually do better. And one of the really good studies that have been done in a controlled study is called the ACTIVE trial. And they basically trained older adults on how to better use their memory and remember better. And in fact, over 5 years, they found that the seniors who participated in this trial had better ability to process information, to reason, and to use their minds. And they're also better able to maintain their independence for longer. So again, keeping your mind active is important, and doing so in hopefully an enjoyable manner is even more important because it will make it more sustainable.
So that'll bring in our Sudoku question from Mary Jo. She said, "Can games like Sudoku and other memory games slow that decline?"
Thank you, Mary Jo. Sudoku itself and other memory games have not been shown to reduce memory decline. The reason for that is that it's very difficult to do those studies, right? Because uh, uh, besides Sudoku, we also do a lot of different things, right?
Mhm.
We socialize, we watch TV, we do the crossword puzzle, and all of that stuff. We can't put a human being in the lab and only have them do Sudoku and see if that actually is what's keeping their mind healthy. But with that said, if someone enjoys Sudoku or Wordle or whatever it is that they enjoy, we definitely encourage them to do that, because that keeps their mind active, and hopefully it will also lead to other things that are also good for their lifestyle. But I wouldn't say that Sudoku itself is the one that is preventing memory decline, but the overall increase in intellectual stimulation.
So Mary, so add Sudoku, but make sure you're still have the right nutrition, that you're exercising, that you're doing other things to kind of help. So it's your overall lifestyle. But Sudoku won't hurt because you are staying cognitively active. But it's hard to isolate that and see if specifically something like that works. Okay.
Okay, next
Okay.
slide.
All right. Let's see.
Alcohol.
Oh
So
no.
the thing with alcohol is that alcohol itself is not bad for you, right? The challenge is how much alcohol are you taking. Um, and again, different times of our lives means we have a different tolerance from alcohol. So if we've always had one or two drinks a night before bed, and we were perfectly fine with that, once we reach our 60s, 70s, 80s, that amount of alcohol may actually not be good for us anymore, right?
Mm.
So again, listen to your body and make sure that you adjust your alcohol intake accordingly. Um, So if you have a glass of wine and you have it with friends, and that gives you the social stimulation and makes you get out and and eat more healthily rather than having that fast food and soda, well, that's not a bad thing, right? But if you have a lot of alcohol by yourself, that's not a good thing. So again, in moderation. Next slide. And I want to show you this slide, which looks at a healthy brain on top, and on the bottom is a brain that has been exposed to alcohol for many years. So you
Mm.
can see it's even worse than the Alzheimer's brain, right? It's all shriveled up and shrunk up. So definitely, too much alcohol is bad for you. It's better than no alcohol is better than too much alcohol for sure. So keep that
Yeah,
in mind.
it was interesting because earlier we had a comment that said that they had a family has a history of alcoholism, and unfortunately, the disease took both their parents in their early 80s, and so um, and I think that's probably could contribute to that. That is a remarkable. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Just seeing that the way that alcohol brain is looking. That's yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, next slide.
Okay.
Smoking. So smoking is bad for you, no matter what amount. Unlike alcohol, which I say, in moderation with friends, healthy diet, that's all right. But smoking is bad for you. Smokers are 40% more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. It's also been linked to other diseases and other risk factor like alcohol misuse, as well as heart disease, stroke, diabetes, lung cancer. So absolutely, this day and age, with everything that we know about smoking, there's no reason to be smoking. Next. One thing that's harder to control is pollution.
Hmm.
It's interesting that the latest research are showing that pollution does increase your risk of developing dementia. These are microparticles that we've been exposed to in small amounts over years, right? This is a picture of Los Angeles, which unfortunately has some pollution. And it's important to know that pollution increases the risk for dementia. Again, where we live is where we live. All we have to do, all we can do is try to, avoid being in and maybe outdoors if it's the air quality index is really poor. And now that we have masks, perhaps that will help with the larger particles. But again, just recognize that pollution is also bad for your health. Next.
Yeah, I see a real kind of convergence of, we always talk about social determinants of health here on many of our programs. And so when you start thinking about education level and living in poor areas, living in urban centers that are near, factories and plants that are putting out a lot of pollution, you had the situation that happened in Flint with the water crisis. All of these factors can, we're talking about poor education, pollution, things of that nature, poor diet, because you might live in an area that doesn't have access to fresh food. So you see how all these social determinants can stack up and lead to a situation where you have a significant cognitive decline later in life. And so that's why we're trying to educate our audience now and then we'll work on some ways to try to overcome those social determinants, even if we live in areas that have, are less than or have a lot of pollution or live in a food desert. There's ways to overcome that so we don't experience these kind of cognitive declines.
Right, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. And for the longest time, we say to avoid heart disease, stroke, etc. But now we know that even our brains and our memories are sensitive to these things.
Yeah.
So whatever we can do is important. This just shows you the world's most polluted cities. Fortunately, most of them are not in the United States, but still, there are areas of the United States that are approaching some of these pollution levels that are not good for us. Next. This is one of my last slides, and it's stress. Especially in this day and age, the stressors that we have all been exposed to in the last few years. Chronic stress is not good for us. Stress is that fight and flight response, and And stress is not necessarily a bad thing if it allows us to run away from that lion or from that really bad thing that we want to avoid. It gives us that that boost to get out of that situation. But chronic stress exposure is definitely bad for us, and it increases the secretion of cortisol, which over time has been shown to be bad for our memory. So whatever we can do to reduce stress, especially chronic stress, is a step in the right direction in terms of reducing our risk of getting memory problems and other diseases later in life. Next. One of the questions that I know that some of you may have is what do I do if I feel that my loved one or me or myself are starting to have memory problem? I just want to show you this very quick eight question item called the AD8, or Alzheimer's disease 8. And this is a very simple yes or no questions. It asks you things about whether the person is having problem with judgment, with the usual hobbies, it's repeating things over and over, trouble learning to use a gadget or using a tool like a remote control and stuff like that, forgetting the month or year. And it's a very simple yes or no thing. So it allows you to get sort of a quick check on someone's memory. And if the person answers two or more, then yes in these questions, then there might be a memory problem, and it's time to talk to your physician about it to see what screening is important to do. Okay. So again, this is my last few slides. If you experience forgetfulness, speak to your physician, right? And if your physician, let's say your primary care physician, does not listen to you, then seek out a memory specialist yourself so that you can get the answer that you deserve. Keep track of your memory and those of your loved ones. Again, we may not be the best judge of how our memory is functioning or not functioning. It's always good to ask your husband or wife, like, hey, how do you think our memory is? Do you think I'm getting forgetful? In the same way, if you think that your parent or your brother or sister or loved one is having memory, it's like, how's your memory? Have you noticed any changes? Because I noticed that you tell me the same story a couple of times this week, or you ask me the same question a few times. How are we doing? Maybe it's time for a memory checkup. And then speak to your loved one about their memory and cognition. Offer help to find good care if they need your help.
That's good to know. Okay.
I'm just going to close by acknowledging my team here at Cedars-Sinai, or my wonderful team at the Goldrich Center. And next slide. Thank you for your attention. This is my Twitter handle. For those of you who want to learn more about memory and aging, please follow me, and I'll be sure to update you on the latest research on memory.
Well, wow, that was fascinating. And so let's get some more questions as we're here wrapping up with Dr. Tan. Great presentation on healthy aging. I love that the acronym BRAINS. So just kind of stick with it. We're going to re-air this again tomorrow evening. So please don't hesitate. Share this with your friend. Tag a friend. This is about your mind, right? And so it's very, very important. So I just what are some early signs? Like I know you say like if we start forgetting, because I've always been bad with names, but like if I met somebody and I can say everything about the situation, that how we met, but I can't remember their name. Is that something that I should be worried about, or is that just kind of, is that a part of the brain that just is forgetting that part?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alice, because we all have different talents, right? And the cognitive abilities are the same. So some people are good with visual memory, meaning you take me to any place in the city and I'll find my way back home, or I don't need a GPS. Because some people are really great with visual spatial memory, but they can't remember a name of anyone, like and it's because that's a different type of memory, right? We think of memory as monolithic, but in fact, there's visual memory, there's list memory, there is there's a verbal memory. There's a lot of different types of memory. So unless there's a change, meaning you used to be able to remember names very, very easily, and suddenly you're not able to remember, that's going to be a source of concern. But if you've never been very good with names, even if you're having problems now and it hasn't changed, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. That's good. Yeah, I was always bad with names, but like I said, I could always remember. Oh yeah, remember we went and we did this and we did that, did that. This. Oh yeah, and I'm like, yeah, but you can't remember my name. That's weird. But okay, so now I feel better. There was a comment earlier, and they were just kind of saying, and basically the way that I'm phrasing it is it ever too late to start to try to correct some of these things? So, like, some of us are at different age points in our life, and some of us may be a little bit more advanced. But is it ever too late to start exercising more or eating better or all of those other things that we talked about that can help improve cognitive functioning, even if some of that cognitive decline has already started?
It's never too late. Certainly, the biggest bang for the buck it will be if you start early, right before serious memory problems start. But it's never too late. There's always going to be benefit. It's just the question of the magnitude of the benefit. So the earlier you do it, the better. But no matter what age, there are things you can do to improve your memory and your thinking and your brain as it ages. So that's an important message to impart.
Yeah. Quick question from one of our YouTube viewers is, if I get this show on screen, yes. What is the percentage of memory loss due to common medication like cholesterol lowering drugs?
Yeah, so that's a controversial question. There was a study that came out a few years ago looking at the cholesterol lowering medication specific called statins
Mm-hmm.
and the link to memory. So there was a study that linked the use of statins to memory problems, but since then, multiple studies have not replicated that. So it may be just an association. So association is not causation, right? So, for
Right.
example, maybe the reason why that study showed that is because people who take cholesterol medications are people who have high cholesterol, right? Or have high blood pressure or other risk factors for developing memory. So it's very difficult to do these studies. So if you're taking cholesterol medication, if your cardiologist or primary doctor feel it's important for you, certainly do not stop it just because you're afraid it's going to cause a problem with your memory. I would urge you to continue and discuss your concerns with your physician.
Okay, and we'll get Kim in underneath the wire. Would a low iron blood count slow down the brain? 'Cause I know there's a lot of people that are anemic, and does that have an impact on brain functioning?
Not so much. So the brain is remarkably efficient in extracting oxygen from the blood cells. So unless your anemia is really really low, and then I think you will start getting dizzy or getting chest pains or other cognition because again the brain is such an efficient organ that it's favored by the blood flow and it's very vascular. So unless the blood count is really low and it impacts your ability to deliver oxygen to the brain, you're likely to have other symptoms before your brain suffers from anemia alone.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. First, I'm going to start with thanking you, Dr. Tan. That was a fantastic presentation, and I applaud you for being patient with my numerous interruptions and answering questions and trying to get some clarification. So I'm going to apologize for that in advance, but this was fantastic. And as Dr. Tan alluded to, this is part one in a 6-part series that we're going to be doing in partnership with our friends at Genentech and with Cedar Sinai. And we're going to be talking about brain health. We'll be talking about dementia and Alzheimer's and caregivers. We're going to be talking about everything. Everything in between. And so we're really, really excited and just thankful that we are partnering with 2 great partners to present this information to you because we're talking about overall health. So Go to blackdoctor.org. I encourage you to go to blackdoctor.org. You can look up at those diets that Dr. Tan talked about. We have a couple of exercise programs that you can get involved with. We talk about exercise. We have a show that we do called Veganish that is on Thursday nights to talk about eating a more plant-based diet. So there's many different ways, whether it's on Facebook Live or whether it's on the website. I encourage you to go to the website, and also Cedar Sinai has a wonderful newsletter and information on their site as well to really help you start that, wherever you are in your journey, your mental journey. You can start it today and make those changes to whether it's lowering your blood pressure, lowering your cholesterol, all of those things that are impacting your overall brain health. So again, thank you, Dr. Tan. I definitely appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. And we will see you in a month. We're going to do this once a month. So we'll see you next month when we're talking about your brain health.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.